is 10:01, and we will call this meeting of the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board to order. Today is Friday, May 15th, 2020, and we welcome everybody by video conference. I have asked Mr. Bolton to open the meeting with our mission moment.
If you'll bear with me and so I can get set. All right. Good morning, Madam Chair, board members, staff, fellow appraisers, and members of the public. The TALCB mission statement reads, the agency exists to safeguard the public interest and protect consumers of real estate services. In accord with state and federal laws, the agency oversees real estate brokerage, appraisal, inspection, home warranty, right-of-way services, and timeshare interest providers. Through education, licensing, and regulation, the agency assures the availability of qualified and ethical service providers, thereby facilitating economic growth and opportunity across Texas. So what is it that this board does to ensure the agency safeguards the public trust? Two things, policy and oversight. Through policy, we must maintain high standards for qualifications and professionalism while seeking ways to reduce burdensome regulations and process for license holders. Through policy, we must ensure ethical practice by Texas appraisers while instructively and fairly employing disciplinary policies. Board oversight is also critical to TALCB administration and operations are consistent with the will of the board and appropriate regulation, and the expectations of Governor Abbott and the people of Texas that we are worthy stewards of this agency. An important aspect to safeguarding consumers and the public is for this board to craft policies to support the appraisal industry in Texas. Burdensome regulation, cumbersome licensing requirements and fees, arduous application process, and heavy-handed execution of disciplinary enforcement are all things that we as a board must be vigilant to seek out and change for the health of the industry. We as a board should not be afraid to right a wrong or to innovate in our mission. I ask that each of our board members keep these principles in mind as we conduct our business today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bolton. I appreciate that sentiment. I would also like to note that our new General Counsel, Kathleen Santos, is here with us today. Commissioner Buchholz will be formally introducing her a little later, but I wanted to take this opportunity to welcome her on behalf of the board. One note on the agenda is that we will be moving agenda item number 6, the executive session, to just before agenda item number 16, so between 15 and 16. We will now have roll call.
Chair Sarah Oates.
Present.
Martha Gail Reed Lynch.
Present.
Chance Bolton.
Present.
Clayton Black.
Present.
Jim Jeffries.
Present.
Tony Pena.
Present.
Lester Renfro.
Present.
Stephanie Robinson.
Present.
And Lisa Sprinkle.
Present.
Please wait for the leader to admit you to the meeting.
Thank
you for your patience.
Excuse me, Madam Chair. I'm
Yes,
having a little bit of trouble with my battery life.
Okay.
So y'all are going to have to let me in on another computer if you don't mind.
Okay. Dion will take care of that. This takes us to agenda item number 3, the comments from visitors on non-agenda items. This is an opportunity for anyone wishing to comment on items today that are not on today's agenda. If you wish to speak on a matter specifically listed on the agenda, you may do so at the time that agenda item is heard. And we already have one request for a public comment on agenda item number 19. If you're a member of the public wishing to speak on a non-agenda item or an agenda item and have not signed up, email general.counsel@talcb.texas.gov. And I believe this is also listed on the website with the meeting link. At this point, we have not received any requests from members of the public to speak on non-agenda items. Agenda item number 4 is the ratification of the official record of the February 27th, 2020 and February 28th, 2020 board meetings as approved for posting on the website by the Secretary of the Board. Do any board members have any changes? I will hear a motion.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead,
Miss-
Jim.
Mr. Jeffries.
this is Jim Jeffries. I move that the board ratify the minutes of the February 27th, 2020 and February 28th, 2020 board meetings.
This is Clayton Black, and I'll second that.
We have a motion by Mr. Jeffries and a second by Mr. Black. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Agenda item number 5 are the final orders and surrenders in the matters of complaint 20-005 and 19-287. We didn't receive any requests for public comment on either of these, but I did want to let Mr. Bolton, Chair of the Enforcement Committee, explain the fine in matter B.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in this particular case, it was a case of unlicensed activity that went on for a period of time. Our penalty matrix requires by statute that we, for this offense, charge the respondent $10,000 a day. And there is no latitude in that. And so for over this period of time, the fee ranged or totaled just over $2.8 million, which is an exceptional fine. We don't typically see that. You know, my understanding is that we have to do that, but I think the reality is there's little likelihood that we will actually collect that fine. So that's kind of the short of it, but since it is such an unusual fine, I thought we should discuss it just a little bit.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Bolton. Do any board members have any questions about these two orders? So no action is required from the board on this agenda item. Agenda item number 6, again, is executive session that has been moved to after agenda item number 15. Agenda item number 7 is committee reports. Mr. Jeffries, the Education Committee report is included in the meeting materials. You have seen and approved this report?
I have. Thank you. Jim Jeffries here.
Thank you. Is there anything from this report that you would like to discuss?
Well, perhaps the most important, well, one of the important things we talked about in the committee was the licensing exam pass rate performance, and we've charged the staff to bring back some additional information and comparisons with other states in our future education committee meeting, and hopefully we can do something that to increase the pass rate here in Texas. It's around 50%, and which is, in my opinion, unacceptable. So that was an important aspect of it, and I wanted to make sure that the full board was knowledgeable that we were working in that area.
We certainly appreciate that, and my understanding is that there has been some work done, and so I'm hoping that the Education Committee can meet, you know, sometime sooner than later, and we can continue that great work.
Will do. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Mr. Bolton, the Enforcement Committee report is included in the meeting materials. You have seen and approved this report? I think you're muted.
Yes, I have. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Is there anything from your report that you would like to note to the board?
If it would please the chair, I would like to just kind of go over some highlights from the meeting to keep the board and the public informed of kind of what we're doing.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we did tackle several different issues and looked at different innovations in our processes. The first being is we had a discussion about whether to consider eliminating the work file requirement for experience audits. And the thinking is that we can be more efficient and a little less deep diving that is not necessary for the audits versus a complaint. And we had a pretty robust discussion and decided that the board should consider this question and have a discussion. So, and we'll be doing that later. The next item we talked about was taking on bad faith complaints. When complaints are filed in bad faith, there is a internal policy and enforcement on how to evaluate that, and we will be proposing a rule that codifies that in the coming board meeting. But basically, we're taking what staff's doing and just make sure that that is a rule and policy. The next issue that we looked at was staff-initiated complaint letters. When the staff initiates a complaint, it differed from when a member of the public filed a complaint as to what information the respondent has. In talking with staff, they had already made reforms of that letter to include greater detail, and we were very pleased with that. And we had no recommendations or motions from that. The next was we are looking at the qualifications of PIC members and seeing if it would be helpful to broaden the qualifications. Principally, we talked about being an AQB certified instructor as a requirement, and the idea was that some others that don't have that qualification may be equally qualified to participate as a PIC member. And so I think we're going to probably have a recommendation after our next enforcement meeting on that. And then the last issue that we talked about is a new concept, what we're calling board enforcement committees. And this is where board members will be part of the process in approving formal charges before they are sent to a respondent. And staff is right now working on the codification of the concept, and we hope to have that back to you in August. And that is the end of my report.
Thank you, Mr. Bolton. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Bolton? Mrs. Reed Lynch, the AMC Advisory Committee report is included in the meeting materials. You have seen and approved this report?
Yes, I have.
Is there anything from this report that you would like to discuss?
All I wanted to go through was the issues that we covered. Number one, we're still checking to see on the National Registry. That's a requirement that the AMCs register to do business with federally transacted items. There's 173 AMCs to date. About 161 have registered and paid. The deadline is June 4th. The second item was we received an excellent report from the ASC, and all areas were in compliance. So that was a good pat on the back for the AMC. The third thing is that, and we'll talk about this later, it has to do with the customary and reasonable fee survey that the TALC does every 2 years. It's at a cost of about $30,000. And so I think that we're going to cover that in a different item. So that came up. Then we're still trying to decide or adopt alternatives to periodic review for AMC. So we've been going back and forth on these items, and I just thought that I would bring them up.
Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions for Ms. Reed Lynch? Mr. Pena, the Budget Committee report is included in the meeting materials. You have seen and approved this report?
Madam Chair, I have seen and I have approved the reports.
Is there anything that you would like to discuss?
Not necessarily. We met on the 23rd of April, as is indicated on the summary, and most, if not all, of what we discussed will be discussed later in agenda items 20 and 21. So unless there's any questions, I'll go ahead and move on.
Any questions for Mr. Pena? Thank you, sir. Agenda item number 11 is the report of the Executive Committee. The Executive Committee met on since the February 28th board meeting. We've met once on May 6th, and all 3 committee members were present. The Executive Committee report is included in supplemental materials. It's not included in the main body of meeting materials. The couple of things I just wanted to mention that we discussed are the request for the Attorney General opinion, which will be before this board in a later agenda item. We just wanted some clarification on how the board is notified about agency lawsuits. We talked about procedures for fast tracking certain dismissals, and we also discussed delegating the authority to sign agreed orders. And that will be before the board in a later agenda item as well, under proposed rules. Does anyone have any questions? Thank you. That brings us to agenda item number 11, staff reports on agency operations.
Okay, good morning. This is Chelsea Buckholtz, Commissioner. I didn't expect for our May meeting to be like this. Thank you for your patience in figuring out this new technology. And I hope you all are well and that your families are well and that you're enduring this really unprecedented time in a safe way. Before I speak specifically about agency operations, I want to introduce our newest member of the team, Kathleen Santos, the board's new general counsel. She started exactly 2 weeks ago and has made a significant contribution to our work in that short amount of time. Before joining us, Kathleen worked in private practice doing property tax litigation. For more than 6 years, she represented property owners in dozens of counties across Texas. So she has also served as an assistant attorney general for the Texas Attorney General's office. She graduated with a history degree from the University of Texas here in Austin, and her law degree is from Baylor Law School. I'm delighted that she has joined us. I know that you will find her to be trustworthy and smart and very supportive of your work. You will hear from her later today, which I think is a testament to her hard work to get up to speed. She has been very, very helpful to us in the preparation of this meeting. So welcome, Kathleen. I must also recognize the hard work of Steve Rapp and his team, the IT department, and the TREC General Counsel, Vanessa Burgess, for their considerable work to make this remote meeting happen. When it became clear that we would need to be handling our business meetings remotely, they got to work as a wonderful team to test platforms and do practice runs and problem solve. So any success from today will be attributed to them, and I thank you for their hard work. This hard work does not at all surprise me. It has been the case across the board during this health crisis with our staff. Our team has risen to the occasion. I set that expectation. I told them what I expected, and they have met and exceeded that expectation. We have also been equipped very well, and I must recognize Doug Olmixon for that. It's because of his leadership that when we met this crisis, we were already on 100% laptops, and we already had the capability of being perfectly remote. In about a week's time, we shifted to a remote model that kept all employees at home, except for mail processing, which has been limited to once a week, and then the financial processing that's associated with what comes in the mail. Today, we have a handful of people in the office. I'm guessing it's the most we've had in several weeks, other than also supporting the commission meeting. And this is the end of our 9th week of being remote. It seems that we, all over the world, we're talking about returning to work, but I have to tell you that our team has never stopped working. I held town halls with our staff earlier this month, just as a touch point, and I let them know that absent direction from elsewhere, we will remain at home at least through the month and into June. And in fact, the governor's office has encouraged that. We had a call with them earlier this month, and they said to the greatest extent possible, we should remain at home, which was comforting to hear. We are developing a plan to return to the office, which I expect to be very gradual and measured, starting with volunteers and capping at a 25% capacity for some time, just to test the waters, and then a gradual increase from there. I'm not in a hurry because of our effectiveness of working remote, but I do want to provide the option of people to return to the office, likely in June, pending additional guidance. Things change by the day and by the week, so we are staying very tentative. But this has changed us forever. Among other things, it's acted as a grand scale experiment that I don't believe I would have been brave enough to attempt without necessity. But we've learned that our staff is trustworthy, and they're committed, and they're able to fulfill our mission from away. We do miss each other, and I think it will be very good to come back to the office. But I don't think we will ever return. I don't think we'll ever look like we did before COVID. We're working to expand our current teleworking culture and policy to account for the conclusions of the screen experiment. So that will look, I see that as two-part. First is cultural. I think for me personally, and much of the workforce, we have rewarded this concept of powering through and to come to work with a cold or with mild symptoms as a show of commitment. We will shift this, and COVID-19 has taught us to do that. So we will encourage people and require it that if they have any remnant of illness or any threat of illness or that within their family, to stay home. And if they'd like to work from home, they can. That's an easy thing to do. And then additionally, we will expand just our everyday, regularly scheduled teleworking policies. In the past, that has basically been Mondays and Fridays and a fairly small number of people. But we will expand that to every day of the week, and with an attempt to balance out our workforce between this physical office and working from home every day. But as we do shift back to a presence at our office, and as COVID fades into the rearview mirror, hopefully sooner rather than later, we will make plans to ensure that our employees are safe with making sure we have proper supplies for sanitation, recommendation of mask wearing when you're in public places, limiting the number of people in our common areas like our break rooms, requiring social distancing, even if that means we continue to use Microsoft Word for division meetings, Microsoft Teams for divisional meetings, so that we don't have large gatherings in conference rooms. And then also maintaining a low capacity in our office. I'm also seeking input from staff on what it will take for them to feel safe in the office place. We have a survey that went out earlier this week to ask people if they'd like to volunteer to return to work starting in June, and then what it will take, what challenges need to be overcome for them to do so. This is definitely a moving target. But even in the midst of this health crisis, we have continued to do all kinds of work, and that includes making key hires. Of course, I've already mentioned the addition of Kathleen. We have also hired Renata Williams, who will begin on Monday as the Director of Finance. She comes from the Texas Military Department, where she has served as the Chief Financial Officer for the Texas National Guard and the state agency that's associated with that organization. We're delighted for her to come on board, and I am expecting great things, and I'm ready to welcome her on Monday. I have a few additional updates that I'm going to go through quickly because I don't want to take too much of your time. One is Pearson VUE, our exam provider for licensing exams. They closed their company-owned testing centers and virtually all examinations ground to a halt in March. They recently reopened those centers again on May 1st, their company-owned sites. And in agreement with them, we have authorized an expansion of all of their third-party examination sites to expand scheduling options and to reduce the backlog of those wishing to take examinations as quickly as possible. This will be a slow process in that their capacity at testing centers is greatly reduced because of their need to social distance. But we are seeing great progress in that backlog being resolved. I think it will at least take the summer to do that. Then based on feedback from the February board workshop, the Enforcement Division has begun conducting a customer service survey to all complaining parties, respondents, and also applicants. That is a very new process, but I'm looking forward to seeing results from that and sharing those results with you. It does include a free-form question just to provide feedback of any sort that they wish to provide. And so when we get some sort of critical mass from that survey, we will provide that to you. I think that we have had so far about 19 responses, and it has been across the board. But a lot of good information, I believe, will come from that. Also, the strategic plan is before you today, and this includes a list of performance measures that we use to measure ourselves, and then a broad listing of redundancies and impediments that relate directly to the operations of the board and the commission. So much of the rest of that report is a series of required reports that are informative and helpful, collected over the course of really the last year as those have become due. But they may be less relevant to our upcoming operational plans of the agency, just in the sense that this strategic plan is the beginning of an appropriations process that we are not a part of. This is required by all state agencies as a way to inform the legislature and the governor's office of plans for the legislative session and for the appropriations process. And of course, we receive our funding in a different mechanism. So it is a very important report that is a wonderful practice to participate in, but it is not the only way in which we make plans for our future. We will, over the course of the coming months, make additional plans for our future in terms of budgeting and how we will spend our time in the next coming years on an operational level. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. No
Chelsea,
questions?
This is
I have a
chairperson,
question.
and this is, no,
Go ahead, Jim.
I don't know if it was Jim, it was me, I
It was
think.
you, Buster.
Yes, this is Buster Renfro. I don't
Oh,
really have a
sorry.
question, Chair, but I do want to commend you on a job well done during a very difficult time, especially since you had just recently taken over control of our agency and got presented with this situation. I think you and your staff have done an excellent job, and I appreciate it very much, and thank you.
Likewise. Thank you very much, Chelsea.
I'd second that. And I have one question, Chelsea. Could the customer service surveys from SES be made available to me as they come in?
Absolutely. Just
Okay.
with each answer? You just want to see each answer as they come in?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we can do that. And thank you for your kind words. I appreciate it. You're only as good as your weakest link, and we have a really strong team.
I would like to.
Excuse me.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Chelsea, this is Stephanie Robinson. How are you doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing good. And I would certainly agree that you have done an excellent job keeping the agency going and moving forward during this difficult time. So thank you and the staff for all your hard work on that. I am very excited to hear about the customer service surveys for the enforcement department. That is outstanding that you guys are moving forward with that. So I'm really excited to hear more about that as we move forward and the feedback that we're going to receive. As a board, are we able to get a copy of that draft that you all are sending out to to the stakeholders?
Yes, ma'am. I'll send the questions that we're asking to
Okay.
the entire board just for your
Okay.
review. And if you have any feedback, I would welcome your feedback on that. And then
Okay.
Mr. Bolton will send you the results as we get them.
Thank you very much.
So I echo everybody else's sentiment and would like to add that I appreciate staff in the transition to work from home. There was a lot going on for all of us, especially people with young children at home, people with limited Wi-Fi and bandwidth, and for everybody to problem solve individually and work together as a team to make sure that that happened. I participated in a national webinar yesterday giving an update on the agency's COVID response, and I was very proud to be able to report how efficient it all became so quickly, and that we're not having complaints. I haven't heard any complaints from any license holders, so always no news is good news. So I certainly commend all of staff for the entire agency in making that happen. So thank you all for your great teamwork on that.
Well, thank you for your patience. I know that some of our children have appeared in some of the meetings, and you've been very kind to allow that sort of thing to happen.
Do we have any other comments on staff reports?
Tony has a report.
Oh, okay. I thought there might be. Okay.
I'm sorry. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm using a different set of headphones. I just want to make sure everyone can hear me through.
Good.
Okay.
I got you.
Thank you. This is Tony Slagle, Deputy Commissioner. I just wanted to update everybody on the customer service report that I sent out on May 5th, just to go over what I always do at these meetings. So we went through our first full month of working remotely, and any technical issues we had at the beginning of the process were pretty much done by that point. The call volume obviously has been down, and that's a result of not only our extension deadline for applications and renewals, but also, you know, the impact of shelter-in-place work orders on our license holders. We're just over half of the volume from last April. So we had around 10,389. Sorry, that's coming from me or not.
That's okay.
We had 10,389 calls coming to the call center this April, as opposed to 20,142 last April. What you hope is that if everything's working correctly, that has an impact on how well we're able to deal with that reduction, and it shows. We have 11-second hold time in April. 99% of the calls that were sent to the contact center were handled on initial call, and almost 100% of the emails, 99.97% of the emails received, were answered within 1 business day. So that's been great. In addition, licensing has been able to take advantage of some of the reduction in the amount of documents we're receiving by getting rid of a kind of a weekly backlog we had going every week, and we are currently in the process of trying to ensure that that backlog stays gone when we roll out into when we get the uptick in volume once we sort of open back up again. I did want to just touch base on a couple of things AMC related. The chair of the committee mentioned an update on the registry. We have about 8 AMCs that have not registered yet through us. They have received several targeted emails, and staff have reached out to them via phone to try to impress upon them the need to do this. We're open to any ideas the board might have to do that as well. Ultimately, it's up to the AMC to go on and register, but we are doing our due diligence to make sure that we're trying to make it as easy as possible for them. I will say that there's been some concern about the fact that when we report the number of panelists that AMCs have registered in Texas, and then the number of panelists that they've reported on the AMC registry, that there's a few AMCs where that number is higher for the registry report than it is what we have. I had a meeting with the ASC this morning with our licensing director and a member of our IT staff to go over a couple of technical issues. But while I was on the phone with them, I asked them about that, and if in fact there were over-reporting, how could we deal with refunds? And we're going to continue to look at that. But what they raised an interesting point that I think is probably likely the culprit for that. AMC's report their panelists from the prior year. We're pulling data currently. So any difference between the number of panelists they have when we report or pull the data for those registered with us and what they've reported for the prior year, there may be a discrepancy because they're looking back to report for the AMC registry, whereas we're looking at current date for with the number of panelists they have now. So there's going to be a bit of a discrepancy between there. I'll look to see if we can pull data from the prior year. I don't think our database allows us to do that, but we'll look into that. But we're not going to accept that as an answer. We're going to dig in a little deeper to see if maybe they have over-reported, and if they are, we'll reach out to them and explain to them how to fix that and possibly issue refunds if we need to do that at that point. But just wanted to keep the board updated on that particular issue. And that's all I really have, unless anyone else has any questions.
Tony, thank you so much for when I asked all my questions.
Martha Gale, you're muted.
Okay.
I can hear.
Sorry, I was muted. My volume on.
Oh, you're muted now.
Okay.
That was my fault.
Okay. Anyway, Tony, I just wanted to say thank you so much for responding to me with all my questions. I know I have a bunch.
No,
I appreciate it.
That's what I'm here for. So.
Okay.
You're welcome. Thank you.
One thing I did want to note from the staff reports, the experience audit backlog, if you trace it back to June, and in June we had 85 pending at the end of that month, and this month we have 43 pending, and only 9 of those are commercial. So I want to commend both staff and the board for the hard work that y'all put in, but long before I came along, in resolving that issue and the resources that were put towards resolving it. And I appreciate the group effort in tackling that and getting it under control.
Tony, can you hear me? This is Clayton Black.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I was muted. Sorry. Just real quickly, you said, I believe, 309 calls this month. Is that right?
No, sir. We had this month. We had. Hold on, let me pull we had 10,389 calls.
There we go.
10,000. So just over half of the number volume we had last April.
And what was last April?
20,142.
That sounds like it. Okay.
I will say we've had a slight uptick in the number of daily calls we've had, and we've been able to still maintain it under, roughly under 30-second hold time with those. One of the things that's happening is with the ability to work remotely is the contact center staff is fully staffed almost on a regular basis, because there's not issues they can deal with issues from home that might have otherwise hindered them from coming into the office. So it's been very, very helpful to the performance of the contact center staff to have that ability. They've really, really worked hard, and
thank you. So okay, and I did get your report. So we're under 30-second hold time. So I don't think we can do any better than that. What was the hold time last month? Since it's about half what it was.
Last month was 1 minute and 32 seconds, and it was 11 seconds this month. But again, there was a decrease in about 30% of the calls from March to April.
Yeah, right. Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Tony.
You're welcome.
Good job.
Any other questions about staff reports? Very good. That takes us to agenda item number 13, discussion and possible action to adopt amendments to Chapter 153. As a reminder, these are rules that were discussed at the last board meeting and have been published in the Texas Register for public comment. We did not receive any public comment on either of them, so they are here before the board again for final adoption. Is there any discussion about these?
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve staff's recommendations.
I second.
We have a motion by Mr. Bolton and a second by Ms. Reed Lynch. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Mr. Bolton, to clarify, your motion was for both items?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously. Brings us to agenda item number 14, discussion and possible action to adopt amendments to Chapter 157. These are before the board for the first time, and I think, yeah, Chelsea's gonna talk about.
Hi, Chelsea Buckholz, Commissioner. I am going to explain items 15A and B together. I'm happy to answer any questions. The 15A is an amendment to section 153.19 related to the licensing for persons with criminal history and fitness determination. This is simply to correct a typo. On page 106 of your materials, you will see a reference to subsection A, and that needs to be corrected to subsection C. On subpart B of this item, this is to amend section 153.24 of the Texas Administrative Code. The proposed amendments here specify who can sign an agreed order in lieu of the chair of the board when she is either unavailable or in need to recuse herself. So staff recommends that the board authorize staff to submit both of the amendments in agenda items 15A and B as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical and non-substantive changes as required for proposal.
Okay, I apologize because that was my fault. I said it was agenda item number 14, but it was actually agenda item number 15. We took care of 13 and 14 together in one motion. So I apologize for the confusion on that. Does anyone?
That was my intent. Sorry.
Does anyone have any questions on agenda item number 15?
Madam Chair, this is Mr. Pena.
Mr. Pena.
I move that the board approve staff's recommendations on agenda items 15A and 15B.
Do we have a second? Mr.
Madam Chair,
Jeffries.
this is Jim Jeffries. I second that motion.
We have a motion by Mr. Pena and a second by Mr. Jeffries. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion passes unanimously. This brings us to the moved agenda item number 6, the executive session. And so we will be ending this Teams and then coming back into another one. So the time is 10:44. And the board will now go into executive session to obtain the advice of legal counsel or discuss pending or contemplated legislation, including settlement offers and enforcement actions pursuant to Texas Government Code 551071. We anticipate returning to open session in approximately 60 minutes. As a reminder to the board members, again, you'll close this Teams and we'll go into a separate one. And then we will rejoin this public meeting again in 60 minutes. Now 12:34. I nailed it on my estimation of how long we would be gone, only off by an hour. And the board And the board is back from executive session and reconvening in open session. We will now address agenda item number 16, discussion and possible action regarding request for Attorney General opinion. As a reminder, back at the September meeting, the board moved to seek an AG opinion on the topic of evaluations and asked the executive committee to work on the language of the AG request. We revisited the same topic in February and discussed how to simplify the request. Taking into account the comments from our board members and with the advice from counsel, we now have a draft that is here for board approval. Having read the letter, is there any discussion?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Jeffries.
to make the, I had suggested some edits to the letter. Do I need to make that as a formal recommendation?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Looking at the letter, the last sentence of the first paragraph, I recommend that we delete that last sentence, which reads, an evaluation is distinct from an appraisal conducted by a certified appraiser and can be used in lieu of an appraisal under certain dollar thresholds. I don't think that sentence is necessary and is somewhat misleading and perhaps trying to lead in the direction of how the answer will come back from the Attorney General. My second recommendation is there are several locations in the letter where we use the term appraisers. I would like to add the word in front of that of some appraisers, so that each one of those instances would read some appraisers rather than just appraisers, which to me is a catch-all phrase implying that there's universal agreement amongst the industry on what the question upon the question that's at issue. So that's my recommendation, to take out that one sentence and add the word some in front of the words appraisers. Do we need that as a motion?
Yes, sir.
I make that motion.
I second Jim's motion to accept the letter to the Office of the Attorney General as edited with our edits.
We have a motion by Mr. Jeffries and a second by Ms. Reed Lynch. Is there any further discussion?
Madam Chair, this is Stephanie. I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you hear me?
I
have a question. If we are to make those edits, is there a way that we can agree upon a deadline for those edits to be made and the letter to be sent? Or does it have to be revisited? Would it have to be revisited again in the next board meeting?
No, staff could make those changes that you've directed, and any non-substantive typographical type changes that are necessary to submit the draft as at a deadline of your choosing.
Thank you.
Monday.
Just a second.
Yeah. If we can set a deadline, that would be great.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Hearing only one nay, do we need to do a roll call vote?
I think that you're fine as long as we can confirm that there was one nay by Mr. Renfro. Are there any additional nays? Are any abstaining? So 8-1.
Very good. All right, the motion carries.
Going to see clarification.
And I just wanted to mention that we should be able to get that letter out by the end of next week with the way you guys want it.
Very good. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Kat.
Thank you.
This takes us to agenda item number 17, discussion and possible action regarding recommendation from the AMC Advisory Committee regarding customary and reasonable survey fees. I will let you, Ms. Reed Lynch, discuss that.
Okay, as I stated earlier in our meeting, our AMC committee meeting, we discussed with the findings brought to us regarding the customary and reasonable fee survey, the results. From several sources, we continue to get the information that the survey was not useful, very few were using, the cost was not justified, and we had input from the Real Estate Valuation Advocacy Association as well as others. So I believe it was our consensus in the meeting that we cease to use that and no longer take that survey and spend the money.
Very good.
So that was our findings.
Very good. Did you mention the cost, Ms.
$30,000.
So that's at $30,000 every 2 years. Very good. Okay. I will entertain a motion.
Madam Chair, this is Mr. Pena.
Mr. Pena.
I move that the board no longer conduct customary and reasonable fee surveys.
I'll second that.
We have a motion by Mr. Pena and a second by Mr. Bolton. Are there any other questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Thank you for doing that, Ms. Reed Lynch. We appreciate you saving the agency that money. Agenda item number 18. Discussion and possible action regarding the recommendations from the Executive Committee regarding jurisdiction of complaints and enforcement of cases for evaluations. These two issues are related in that one arose out of ongoing discussions of the other. In the course of us tackling the issue of evaluations, we discussed how to handle cases where there's dual jurisdiction between the board and the commission, where licensure and activity overlap with both. So the question we are discussing is for cases that implicate the jurisdiction of both agencies, which agencies should investigate and discipline. This doesn't require any specific action by the board, but is being brought forth for discussion and possible action if anybody has anything to add to that. It's just an ongoing discussion.
Madam Chair, I think that we discussed that so much with the Scott case, and I am of the opinion that if it's a person with a broker's license and not an appraiser, hopefully that would go to the TREC side. And if it was an appraiser, that then our enforcement would consider it in our purview.
Very good. I think staff is now understanding how we would like for those cases to be carried forth, and we will continue with those discussions with staff to clarify on any case-by-case basis. Does anyone else have any discussion? Again, there's no action required, but we would certainly welcome any motion that anyone had. Hearing none, we will move on to agenda item number 19, discussion and possible action regarding experience audit work file submission. This came out of the Enforcement Committee, and so I will ask Mr. Bolton to introduce it.
Okay, so this is a discussion that we started in the Enforcement Committee. Oops. Yeah. With the thinking that for a couple of different reasons that it may not be necessary to include a work file for experience audit purposes, at least initially. And so one of the things that we've done, and I've done some research that I coupled with some from the chairperson that demonstrated that a lot of other places don't require work files. And examples of that would be New York, California, Virginia, Illinois, Pennsylvania, New Mexico. I'm sure there are others, and there may be some that do require the work file, but a lot of states don't. What we're trying to do is to free up resources to do other things, reduce expense, and as well as kind of take the enforcement bent off of these experience audits. And what we're looking for is minimal use competency. And I think if the way this would work is that at the time that you receive an appraisal report, you're going to see competency or you're not going to see competency. And if you don't see competency, the investigator can or the auditor can request the file. And at that point, they will either say, okay, well, the reason why I didn't see competency is because it's in the work file, or there is not competency. As I said, we thought that this was something that we should discuss as a board. And the main reason is from my standpoint is I'd like to get others' feedback that we can use in crafting a recommendation to the board on this issue.
Very good. Does anybody else have input on that? Any questions?
Madam Chair, this is Buster Renfro.
Mr. Renfro?
I just want to take some moments here. I've served on that committee with Chance, and when Chance brought that topic up to me, I thought it was a worthy topic to have a discussion. I believe that we should always be looking at our processes and our procedures to see if they're working efficiently, effectively, and if they're benefiting the entire process. And so we put it on there. And after a robust discussion at the committee meeting, like Chance indicated, we thought we ought to have a full board discussion. With that in mind, and the fact that there are some board members who may not know the history here, I was wondering if somebody on staff might be able to give us a little background of how we evolved, because I know when I first applied, all I had to do was fill out an affidavit. I didn't even at the time have to submit any appraisal reports. And so I was wondering if somebody on the staff would give us a little background of how we got and evolved to the point where now we're requiring 2 appraisals and the work files.
Madam Chair, board members, this is Troy Bollier, the Director of Standards and Enforcement Services, and I'm happy to give you all some background information. I started with the agency in late 2005, and in 2006, the appraisal subcommittee had their 2-year audit, and it was at that point when applicants were only submitting, I believe it was an affidavit at that time. So there wasn't actually a submission of any reports or work files. And the ASC, their position was that that work product had to be looked at. And so after that point, they actually made us go back and make some corrections to, I think, over 100 different applications. But at that point, we then kind of, by 2008 and 9, the ASC had come out and said that you need to be auditing 100% of the applications for certification. And at that time, we still had a statutory provision that called for a random 5% audit. So there was an interim period where we were doing 100% audit of all certification applications. And then if someone was merely applying for the license level, it was just a random 5%. And then a few years after that, the ASC moved to requiring 100% audit of all applications, whether it was a trainee applying for license, certification, whatever. And so that's been probably not quite 10 years, but almost 10 years now where we've been in a 100% audit context. So I hope that kind of gives you a background on the history. The rule at issue is Rule 153.15. So that's kind of the rule that's at issue, and there's also a statutory provision. I think you have both of those in your materials.
Troy, thank you. This is Stephanie Robinson. Thank you for that explanation. And as a new board member and a public member at that, that was very helpful for me. Quick question. You mentioned that they are now requiring 100% of all audits of all applications. does that mean that does that process involve work files? Are we required to take work files for all 100% of those audits?
No, ma'am, you're not required to take work files. What I will say, though, that I think is important for you to understand is that we want to make sure our staff's committed to minimizing any delays and impediments to applicants, because last year we did have a backlog, and we're very proud that we got through that backlog. The concern that staff has, and I think was expressed at the committee level, was that not having the work files may actually diminish the efficiencies and the turn time, because there are many times when, if you look at an appraisal report, there may be a question mark issue that could be very quickly resolved by looking at the work file. And we determine, hey, what looked like it might have been a problem is not a problem, and we can do that very quickly with the work file. Please, I'm sure you're aware, but the entire process now is electronic. We've been doing it about 2 years. So we send out an electronic request with a link to Microsoft OneDrive, and then the applicant uploads the appraisal reports and work files. So they're already sending us material in an electronic format, and having those work files there when we need them would enable us to maximize efficiencies and turn times, rather than saying, okay, now we have this question mark and either having to go do independent research or reaching back out to the applicant. So I just wanted you to be aware that there's an efficiency aspect. You know, we've worked so hard to get those turn times down, and like I said, we're committed to maintaining those.
Well, one of the other things that we're committed to is reducing the regulatory burden on our stakeholders, and that comes from the governor's office. And this is one way that we can do this. And there is a mechanism if there is a question where what we intend is that simply the investigator can ask for the file. He's got to have a good reason for it. But yeah, that's, I mean, that will be, I foresee that we're not going to have that many problems there. But what we are doing is that in most cases, the trainee or the applicant is not going to have to deal with this. I can tell you when I did my audits, they asked for 3 files. It totaled over 2,500 pages. And the retail price at FedEx was going to be like $1,250 to scan. They only charged me $450. But I think we need to keep in mind the governor's goal here as well. And like I said, the purpose of this discussion is I would like to get just feedback from the other board members as to what their thoughts on it are.
And I think we have a public comment on this as well.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir, Mr. Jeffries.
Well, I haven't heard this issue before, other than knowing that it was on the agenda today. And I've listened to both Chance and Troy and Buster, and not having any deep thoughts, I'll admit. It does seem that reasonable, as long as we leave the provision in that the investigator or the auditor can immediately request the work file, and it's done electronic anyway now. It seems to me that that's not requiring them for the first submission makes a lot of sense, and I would support that.
Very good. Could I ask if Mr. DiBiasio is on the line?
I am here, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the opportunity, and to the board. I did want to just take a moment to say that we do, at the Appraisal Institute, support the elimination of the existing requirement that trainees submit their work files along with the appraisal reports that are selected from the log as part of the experience screening process. When I was first made aware of this issue several weeks ago, I did a little bit of research and really could not find any other states that require trainees to submit their entire work file along with the selected reports. And as Mr. Bolton said, there are actually several states that specifically say that work files should not be submitted along with the selected reports. I also took a look at the relevant policy statements from the appraisal subcommittee, and it doesn't appear as if they have any requirement that says that trainees or folks that are looking to upgrade have to submit their work files with the reports. Most states require that the applicant submit their experience log, and as you know, then the agency chooses 2, 3, maybe 5 reports for which the applicant is requested to submit a true and correct copy of the report. And of course, the state always has the right to request a copy of the work file for a specific report if there is probable cause to believe that a violation of USPAP or of state law has been committed. And we don't have any problem with that. Obviously, the state should always have the right to request a copy of the work file if they do see an issue. And as Mr. Bullier recognized, in some cases, the work file could be of help to the trainee in exonerating them from any question as to whether or not the report is USPAP compliant or not. So we just don't believe that submitting the work file should be an automatic requirement. Of course, we feel that putting more information in the hands of the reviewer could result in an enforcement fishing expedition, if you will. So the applicant really should be judged only on the contents of their report, which is what ultimately in the real world ultimately gets submitted to their client, and the client never sees anything that is in the work file. So reviewers should be looking for, whether the applicant has satisfied the minimum qualifications, and that there would be no harm to the public if the person were to become licensed or certified. Experience reviewers shouldn't be looking at reports as part of the experience review process from an enforcement perspective. The experience review process should be a teaching exercise rather than a process that could result in disciplinary action. As it stands right now, someone that's charged with reviewing a trainee's experience could be the same person who just reviewed another report for a disciplinary action or the potential of a disciplinary action. So again, the experience review should just be making sure that the trainee or the person looking to upgrade their license is minimally qualified. I did want to make one second comment, which is that we would wholeheartedly support moving the experience review function from the enforcement division over to the licensing side of the shop. Again, experience reviews are part of the licensing process and should be focused on ensuring that the trainee or the person looking to upgrade is minimally qualified. And enforcement, of course, should be focused on ensuring that existing licensees comply with USPAP and all state laws. So having your enforcement staff performing experience reviews, we think, has a chilling effect on the willingness of supervisors to take on trainees because the supervisor could potentially, be held responsible for errors of their trainees, and this includes minor errors in the trainee's work file. The experience review process should not be an intimidating process for trainees. And I think in some cases over the last several years, it has become a little bit intimidating. Now, on the other hand, the enforcement process should absolutely be an intimidating process. You want that to have a deterrent effect, and it shouldn't be a pleasant process to go through an enforcement action. So we would support, the establishment of a peer review committee of sorts that is entirely separate from the peer investigative group that reviews complaints for enforcement purposes. This peer review committee would be charged only with reviewing reports as part of the experience review process. So those are really the two things, 2 points that I wanted to make, is that, we don't see any real benefit or need for the work file to be submitted. And again, we would support some structural changes within the agency to move that experience review process to the licensing side rather than enforcement. I know that you also received a letter from FACT on these same topics, but I did want to just offer our thoughts as well. And I do appreciate the opportunity to make these comments virtually. So with that, I thank the board and would be happy to answer any questions.
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. DiBiasio?
I would like to thank him for his time in looking into this and commenting and giving us the Institute's position. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Scott, I think that was a great suggestion about moving this over to licensing as well. It seemed to be a dovetail type recommendation.
I agree. This is Stephanie Robinson. I agree with that. That is an excellent suggestion to consider moving that to a different department, or perhaps doing the peer review committee, because it should be more of an educational experience as opposed to an audit experience. So that was a great suggestion. I agree with that.
Okay, I support that.
I do have a question, Madam Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
I do have a question. Do we know during the sunset review that took place, was there any type of recommendations around this particular issue, or any feedback regarding this particular issue?
I don't think so.
No, not that I recall.
I don't believe so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Scott. We certainly appreciate you logging on and sticking with us this afternoon to give us those comments and give us sort of a national perspective on it so that we know what other states are doing. We certainly don't want to be the most difficult state. And that's definitely not our goal, and that's definitely not what our governor would like for us to be. So we appreciate that perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any comments? Mr. Bolton really just wanted to get everybody on the board, your consensus, so that the enforcement committee could then go and take everybody's thoughts and put them towards some sort of policy change. So does anybody else have any comments or questions about this that could help the enforcement committee to do their work?
This is Buster Renfro. I did spend some time looking into this. And first of all, let me say, Mr. DiBiasio, it was good to see you, even if it's just virtually. We appreciate your input, a lot of value in your comments there. We thank you for taking the time to share those with us. But a couple of things I want to be sure of here. I don't think the requirement for a work file always existed. And so sometimes it makes me wonder why a previous board may have put that into place. And that's for maybe another discussion. But what I want to be sure, Troy, I hope you're still there, is do we have any feedback, or have we gotten any feedback from our current contractors who are doing the audits with regard to having a work file available? Because we have made significant strides in reducing the timeline and the time it takes to process an audit. And I don't know if the work file adds value to that, it enhances that process, if it makes it more efficient, because I certainly would not want to take any action that makes us step backwards. In other words, I understand that maybe having to submit your work file may be a burden, but overwhelmingly, the comments I get is that the work file allows the auditor, whether it's staff or whether it's a contractor, it gives them this ability to do what I've been heard as a term, deep dive, and it scares participants, it scares trainees, and it scares supervisors. If that's the motive, there's certainly ways to resolve that. And Mr. DiBiasio, you brought up a very good way to take it away from the enforcement division. Or we put a rule into place that no complaint can be investigated or processed without the board's approval. So there are other mechanisms if that's the biggest motive. I just don't want to take action that takes away from the gains we have made and the strides we have made in getting our audit processing times greatly reduced. So have you had any feedback? Do you have any input that would give us some kind of certainty that that's not going to happen?
Yes, Mr. Renfro, Troy Bollier, Director of Standards and Enforcement Services. I have gotten feedback from some contract review appraisers who've indicated that the work file was very helpful. Some of them even indicated they didn't want to participate in doing the review if they couldn't have the work file because it made it immensely easier and quicker for them to do that.
Okay, I appreciate those comments. My concern is I just don't want to take any kind of action that makes us step back in that timeline, because you understand that if we ask for it on the backside, because we do have questions, that trainee or that applicant has 60 days to respond and provide that work file. And those days, while they're nothing we control, they are always in the sunsets report, and every way we evaluate, they go against us. Because we tried to get it reduced to 20 days and the governor's office turned us down. And even though we're aware of those 60 days, we can't, separate ourselves from that. And for some reason, some applicants take all of them. I mean, they're granted and they have them, but it's going to slow down the process and the timeliness of doing an audit if we have to ask for a file on the backside. And so I just want us to think all these issues through before we make this decision.
Well, Buster, I mean, to answer that, I understand what you're saying. I think that if you don't have to organize a file, and which, a lot of my appraisal files, I will freely admit, will need organization if they're presented to others. And if they don't have to do that, and they don't have to get it scanned and all that, which may be challenging to some, and it's definitely, again, one of our reasons for proposing this is to reduce the burden on the appraiser in accordance with the governor's wishes. But if all you have to do is submit a PDF of your appraisal, which you probably already have, that makes that a little bit easier. And if it's an issue, there's always a mechanism to go back and fix it. But from my own experience, there, for the most part, I can determine whether I have an opinion as to USPAP compliance from the report. Sometimes you do need to dig a little bit deeper because something's unclear, but most of the time, I'm confident that I can determine USPAP compliance, minimal USPAP compliance by the appraisal report.
And I would second that. As most of you know, I am a reviewer and I review appraisals every single day without the work file. And I would argue that that I'm doing it for the safety and soundness of banks, for risk mitigation, as opposed to a minimal USPAP compliance. I would argue that my review is much more in depth than that. And so I don't think that if I have questions, I can certainly ask them. I've never asked for anybody's work file in order to complete my review, but I certainly have asked follow-up questions if I had any. But I think even if you send this to the contract reviewer, if you send them the appraisal and say review this, that's one thing. If you say review this and the work file, now they're going, oh, the expectation is a deep dive. The expectation is not, I'm looking at the report and checking for minimal USPAP compliance, And so I think providing the work file to external reviewers, in a sense, tells them what it is that we're wanting from them. So I think that it leads them in a direction that we're not trying to go. We're not asking them to do a deep dive. We're asking them to check for minimal USPAP compliance. And if you think about this, if somebody has been a trainee for 3 years, there is a 99% chance that they have been reviewed in the marketplace by either a bank reviewer, a Fannie and Freddie reviewer, opposing counsel, there's almost no appraisers that aren't reviewed. So that trainee's work has probably been reviewed over and over and over during the 3 years that they have been an apprentice. And so by the time they get to us, the marketplace has already kind of done that for us. And so we're just checking the box and checking for minimal use PAP compliance so they can get on to the exam.
Madam Chair, I appreciate everybody's comments today, and we will take that back to the committee, and Buster and Tony and I will talk it through, and hopefully we'll be able to come up with a recommendation for the board in August. I would also like to request that I'm intrigued by Mr. DiBiasio's point about moving licensing. Moving the audits to licensing rather than enforcement. But since we don't have a licensing committee, I would ask that we maybe take that issue on also in our next enforcement committee meeting.
Very good. I look forward to the work that y'all will do on this, and I appreciate you coming and asking the board so that you had some direction. Does anybody else have any other comments about this agenda item?
Madam Chair, this is Stephanie. Just one final comment or question. Is there a way that the enforcement committee or our staff can give data as to what percentage of review of audit experience audits require the use of the work file versus the ones that did not?
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
This is Troy Bollier. I don't know if this is helpful, but in your materials, I believe it's on page, it's in the staff report. If I can pull it up, I can point you to some data. I'm not sure it will answer Ms. Robinson's question completely, but on page 80, I believe it's 85 and 86. What you have there is the incidence of applications that were approved, denied, and withdrawn. So you can see that there's only roughly 2 to 4%, and this is for the last 4 fiscal years. There's only roughly 2 to 4% of applicants that are actually denied. And if you look at slide 86, that's a total of 21 applicants over those 4 years that have actually had a denial. And over half of those are ethics issues. 33% are competency, gross competency issues. And the other 14% just withdrew, decided they didn't want to pursue, they didn't submit the reports when requested. So I don't know if that's partially answers your question, Ms. Robinson.
Thank you, Troy. I appreciate that information there. I was more referring to those that have been approved. When it went through the experience audit process, is there a way to track data on when you guys went through that process with that particular case? Did you have to rely on the work file or not in order to make your approval decision? Is there any way to determine, because I know you had mentioned that the work file was very helpful in getting a lot of those cases taken care of quickly, but I'm just curious as to, do we have a ballpark, is it over 50% of the cases you had to rely on work files, 20%?
Yes, ma'am. Unfortunately, I don't have actual data for you. I could tell you anecdotally that I think there's a number of cases where it speeds along resolving the file, but it's not data that we actually track at this time, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, Troy. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
And I would like to say that I think we talked about this at the last board meeting, and although the audit outcome has a high percentage rate of them being cleared, if you'll recall from that letter from FACT, it was even amongst those 95% that some of them had been through the process, and their perception was that it was an adversarial process. And so again, that's what we're trying to get away from that public perception that this is an enforcement deal as opposed to a licensing and application.
This is Buster Renfro.
Yes, sir.
I have a thought. I don't know what it's worth, but anyway, I was wondering if there was any way that Troy or his staff could send out some kind of correspondence to our contract auditors who are actually processing these files, some kind of informal question, and just ask them, ballpark figure, what percentage of the audits you review did you actually need to review or look into the work file before you were able to approve of it? If we had some idea of what that percentage was, it would help us figure out whether or not we are going to start experiencing longer delays that would be a result of asking for the work file on the backside, which we are, if I understand right, we're still going to move forward and allow for that. So if these guys or these individuals told us 50% of the time, we need to look in the work file, because I don't know what kind of quality of work they're getting. Okay, I hope it's really, really, really good, but they're trying to determine if it complies with USPAP. And I don't know how many times they're referring to the work file. I would feel better if that percentage was really low, because then we would know we're not going to get a lot of these requests on the backside. Because right now, the way we're standing, we're saying we're not going to make you submit a work file, but if your auditor says he needs your work file, then we're going to go back to you and ask for it. If we were trying to get where I think everybody wants to do, we would say the work file can never be requested. Your report stands on its own. It either gets a thumbs up or gets a thumbs down. Because what I'm worried about is taking that time period, which we have worked diligently to reduce, and ended up with a majority of these now being longer because of the way we've changed the process. So if you could put something like that together real quick, Troy, I think I'd feel better in knowing that we're not going to end up with a bigger problem.
So you're saying that we should ask them and say, hey, we sent you that information. Did you look at it?
Right now,
I think they're going to say, of course I did. Of course I delved into that work file because you sent it to me and that's what you want me to do. I did. 100% I did.
I don't know if when we send it that we're telling them you have to review the work file. My understanding was the work file is available if you need it. And I might be wrong. Because obviously, if you read USPAP, you cannot submit an appraisal report to any client unless you have a complete work file, or otherwise you have violated USPAP. That is in the record keeping rule, and that's an ethics violation. So USPAP takes it pretty serious, this work file. I'm not saying that means we have to have it submitted, but what I'm concerned with is if we're waiting till the end of the process to ask for the work file, I'm hoping that that's not going to be a high occurrence, because I'm going to tell you that our audit times are now going to start going further and further out when we have no control over the 60-day response time. I don't want to end up there, because we are moving forward and we're doing really good right now. We are reducing that time. I don't want to come up with a policy that's going to make us go backwards. So if we could get some form, now, if you're correct, and we are telling them you have to look at the work file, well, I already know the answer. It better be 100%, right?
Well,
So maybe,
Mr. Renfro, you're an appraiser. If I asked you to look at an appraisal and check for minimal USPAP compliance, would you need the work file?
it's hard to say. It depends on the work I'm reviewing. I might be able to ask that. I'm probably going to be in a position to call that appraiser. I'm going to ask my client, do you mind if I call the appraiser and ask him about some things? And through that discussion, I'm going to be able to determine whether he's got a work file and he really can back that up. But that's not what we're asking. We're not telling these auditors, oh, you can call that trainee. I think that'd be worse. Those trainees would be shaking in their boots going, oh no, this is not good. So I think what we were doing was we were saying, here's the work file. If you have any questions that you can't figure out in the appraisal, there's the work file for you to look at. And if you can resolve it with the work file, good to go forward. But now what we're saying is, if you have those questions, you can call us up and tell us you need the work file. We're going to contact that trainee. They're going to have 60 days to respond. Then we're going to send that to you, and then you got to finish your audit. And that bothers me.
Well, yeah, that's a great question, because like you said, I said when I do a review, if I have questions about something, then I can ask the appraiser. And my understanding is in the past we have called appraisers and spoken to them, which is part of the reason why we got the opinions that it was adversarial. And so maybe if we decide that there are instances in which written questions and written responses are appropriate, then maybe that could be, part of the solution as well.
This is Buster Renfrew again, because my concern, again, I'm going to reiterate, is that 60 days they have to get us that work file. And we can't do anything about that. So your idea would make it maybe an email correspondence and a much faster turnaround. It's a good idea.
Right, because the feedback that I heard was when it's on the phone, then you sort of think, well, that person is just making a real-time judgment, and I don't really have control over that. So if it's a written response, then I would. And I believe, if I'm correct, the 60 days, the reason why the governor rejected it is because statutorily we have a 20-day time frame, or vice versa, and that's why they struck down that rule change. And so we could, ask for that to be changed statutorily if that part of it is an issue.
And I'll tell you, I kind of like where you're going with this, Buster. I mean, if let's say, just as for instance, in the appraisal it states that they make a adjustment for 20% for some element of comparison, and why can't the investigator go, I don't really see a justification for this. Do you have something in the work file that proves that? And the guy can say, yeah, I did it in a pairing analysis. Here it is. And so it doesn't mean that, in my mind, it doesn't mean that when requesting the work file, you have to give them the whole work file. If there's something specific to clear it up, the investigator can ask for it. And don't you think a trainee is going to want to comply with that?
Yes, I agree with you. And what any idea we can come up with that I think gets us out of that 60-day time frame of asking for a work file is what I'm trying to avoid. And knowing how many times that might occur certainly would help. If it's only a 5% occurrence, then it's not really a big deal. I just don't want us to get criticized again for not being able to reduce the audit time. I mean, we're headed to a 30-day turnaround, which would be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that hopefully, if it's expediting my process for me as an individual, I'm going to get my work submitted quickly. If it's on the enforcement side and maybe I have something to hide, then I might be delaying the process.
Yeah.
So I think by nature, it's going to resolve itself if you've got people that are, want to move forward.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree with that as well. This is Stephanie again. I also think that it's going to be our agency approach as well. Again, making the recommendation to look to a different department to handle this is a great suggestion. It's the approach the agency takes when requesting this information may help us get that information faster. For example, if we're working as a partner with them to help them get through this process, I believe they will respond a lot faster and we won't have to deal with the 60 days. But I do think the 60 days is, that can be a concern because we don't want to go backwards, but it's also going to be our agency approach in requesting this information.
Troy, could you speak to the 60-day, 20-day difference?
Yes, Madam Chair. The statute, Chapter 1103, has a 60-day time frame in which the applicant is allowed to submit that file. So that was why we had to halt that previous potential rule amendment.
Okay, and so if we maybe ask FACT to fix that legislatively as part of all the other things that they did, would it be easier if it was an open-ended time frame, or do you think that statutorily it needs to be a time frame, or a time frame determined by rule might be something that would be easier to be malleable?
I think anytime you can be specific, it's helpful because it also allows us to follow up. It gives staff clarity on what the requirement is, and it also allows us to then follow up with the applicant once the definitive point has been crossed. so that we can make sure that we're moving efficiently through the process and minimize the burden on the applicant.
Okay, very good. Thank you, sir. Does anybody else have any comments for the Enforcement Committee's future work? Thank you, I appreciate that. Mr. Bolton, did we give you what you needed?
I think so. I think this was a good discussion, and I think we will probably have more robust discussions in the committee meeting, which just so everybody knows, I'm planning on calling probably in the next couple of weeks. I'll be working on that next week so we can work with everybody's schedule. I'd like to get out in front of things rather than wait till right before the next board meeting. But yeah, I think I've got a good sense of where we are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for all the work.
Thank you, Martha.
We are now on agenda item number 20, discussion and possible action regarding TALCB budget and investment policy. And I believe Priscilla has a report for us.
I do. Madam Chair, Priscilla Pivo, Director of Staff and Support Services. I will be presenting. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes.
I will be presenting on agenda items 20 and 21. Hi, everybody. For the budget investment policy and the first draft of the board budget. Agenda item 20 is found on page 125 is the budget investment policy. It was reviewed by the budget committee. It's not intended to go into effect until September 1st. Staff will continue revisions alongside the budget and will present the final version at the August meeting. No action is required by the board at this time, although input, feedback, and questions are appreciated.
Does anybody have any questions?
If none, I can move on to item 21.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Agenda item 21 is the first draft of the board budget on page 133. Page 134 are the explanatory notes for the budget. The fiscal year 2021 first draft budget was reviewed by the budget committee, is offered for consideration to the board. The draft includes all requests made by division directors and incorporates a new format. This is similar to the format that we reviewed in your February meeting. Because this is a first draft, action is not needed at this time to approve the budget. However, the board may wish to direct staff to make changes for review. Staff will continue to work alongside the budget committee to finalize the 2021 budget for final review and approval by the board at the August committee meeting, at the August board meeting. There is no necessary motion unless the board would like to direct staff.
Does anybody have any questions for Priscilla? I don't have any questions for staff on this. I would ask the budget committee to, the first fee increase was implemented in January, the first of the two. And so now that things are a little bit more under control, the backlog has been cleared out a little bit. The enforcement committee is working very hard to help staff get to a process of dismissing bad faith complaints more timely and without a lot more work. We're talking about processes to speed up straight dismissals, trying to lighten the load, so to speak, on the enforcement division, that the budget committee explore some ways to maybe mitigate that next fee increase that will take place January 2022, if possible, so that when we go out and talk to license holders, we can let them know that we are working on getting that reined in a little bit. So I would just ask the budget committee to consider that.
Hey, Madam Chair, it's Tony. I just wanted to just thank you for that input, and also just let you know that as we meet as a committee, we are taking real world approaches to this and playing offense and defense. By that, I mean, we do look at the revenue side, but we're also tackling line item expenses, primarily the larger ones, each time, just to try to see if there are places where that possibly we miss something or ways to be super efficient without being detrimental to the agency. So I feel like each time we meet, and I know Priscilla, and I know we'll have someone else involved in the process soon, we just take these approaches that may seem common in our world, the real world, but also just add value to what we're trying to do as an agency.
And we appreciate that very much. And Ms. Robinson attended her first committee meeting. She's now on the budget committee and attended her first committee meeting. And I just want to say thank you to her for digging right in and asking questions and looking at the numbers and being an active participant on that committee. So I certainly appreciate you for that.
Madam Chair,
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate that very much.
Madam
Happy
Chair,
to do it.
Clayton, if I could weigh in a little bit as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your comments, Sarah, and I appreciate that, and we will certainly try to move forward in that direction as well. And thanks to Tony for taking over the budget. I just want to remind everyone that essentially the reasons that we raised fees to begin with was a direct result of trying to meet the directive of the Sunset Commission. So it pained us to raise fees, but we heard loud and clear that there's some customer service related issues that have to be met. And so we said, well, we can handle it, we can take care of it, but we're gonna have to hire some more folks, which means we're gonna have to raise fees. So we can certainly readdress it and look at it again, and we'll be glad to. But I just want to remind everyone that that's what happened essentially, and it was very painful for us to do. And it didn't just happen overnight; it was multiple meetings, and it's all public record, and anyone can review those committee meetings and so forth. And essentially, we went back and forth, round and round, several times. Myself, Tony, and Alex Sostre at the time, the three of us were on that committee together, and we all had differing opinions, and staff came back several times with different approaches for us. And ultimately, we decided upon three recommendations that we actually brought to the board, and didn't just push it through committee, but we, brought it to the board and said, hey, we got three options. This is what we're down to. And they got the board's opinion. And best I recall, the board kind of weighed in on their opinions. And so that's kind of the way it evolved and came forward. So I'm not against trying to lower fees or not implement that next round, as you said, but we did come up with that solution, and it was basically, just to meet the directive of the Sunset Commission, which they made very loud and clear to us. And I was the chair of that committee at the time, and I wanted to meet that directive, and staff, I think, did a fantastic job as well. So not saying that that's not a bad idea, because it could be a great idea. I'm against reducing fees, but it was just simply trying to meet the needs that were put before us. And, we just felt that was very strong, that we meet those concerns of the Sunset Commission. So that was really the way everything evolved, and that's the way it came about. So
and I do think that those hard choices that you make, that we can see from the staff reports, that those absolutely changed things, and they absolutely benefited the whole agency and the license holder. So we appreciate you making those tough choices, because I do recall as an outsider watching that process, and it was an arduous process. And I know that y'all struggled with which is why you took the board options, because it was a difficult decision to be made. And I think that we are where we are today because of those decisions. So we certainly do appreciate y'all making them, even though they are unpopular decisions. Sometimes that has to happen, right?
Madam Chair.
Clayton, Martha Gale, I just wanted to say, I think you've had a really good hand on the leadership of your committee, and now sending it with Tony. You guys have done a great job, and I would never want to be in your shoes.
And I'm glad Tony is one of those. I know he's doing a great job.
Yeah,
Madam Chair, I'd just like to say that, and to you, Clayton, that it's totally understood where you came from and what the environment that we were in at the time, where we had backlogs, where we had customer service issues that had gone on and on and on. And it really was a triage that you basically just had to throw money at. And things have greatly improved. And, it's not just money, because the staff worked their tail off to get things back in shape. But now that it is in much better shape, I think that's the opportunity to kind of look at how do things change? How do you sustain on less? And also, what in the world is the office environment going to look like? And what does that do to budgets? I mean, for instance, Twitter, I think yesterday came out and said that all of their employees never have to come back to work. They can work from home forever. And so is that going to be a possibility? Is that a new norm? Who knows? But I think, and I applaud you, Madam Chair, for looking at this, because things have changed from where they were a year ago, and they may change even more in the next year.
Sure. I just want to. Okay. So once again, I agree with what y'all are saying. I just want to make sure that we don't cut back, and all of a sudden we get into a situation a year or 2 or 3 years from now where now we've got hold times going back through the roof, and we've got all kinds of customer service issues that are not being met, and we get all of a sudden people say, well, what happened? Y'all addressed this. And, that's all. I just want to make sure, be careful that we don't get back into that same situation that we were in 2 or 3 years ago. But at the same rate, hey, if we can not raise fees, then that would be fantastic as well. So I agree. I just want to make sure we don't circumvent what we have done, and all of a sudden customer service issues go up again. That's all I was trying to say.
I totally agree with that. And I would just say that if there are areas where we decide to make changes, that we don't cut the budget first. We make the changes and then cut the budget. And to that, Mr. Black, as I've probably mentioned before, I will be the one sitting in front of the Sunset Commission at the end of all this. And so I will have to answer for any budget cuts that have been made and have caused problems. So I am acutely aware of that.
Thank you.
I just want to say that as a new member, I'm really looking forward to this challenge. One of the things that, again, the governor that we talked about before has asked us to do as an agency is to look at ways to reduce barriers for our professionals out there. So I do think this is a great challenge for us as a committee to take on. I'm looking forward to ways to reaching, the goal of not having to increase fees so much. But I am curious though, with everything going on with COVID and obviously our economy here in Texas and our state economy, have we heard anything? I don't know if the staff can answer this or not, but have we heard anything? Is this going to affect our budget or our revenue or our expenses in any kind of way?
Madam Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
Priscilla Pifo, Director of Staff and Support Services. Shall I reply to that comment?
Yes.
So what we're doing right now is looking at revenue as it comes in. We are comparing revenue from now where it was a year ago, and we're seeing revenue is about a little bit higher when we came into this in March, but we won't know until we look at April and May and now probably June before we can really say. So I'm thinking when you guys meet as your next budget committee, you'll have a better snapshot and a better picture for where revenue is. Does that help at all?
Yes, thank you very much, Priscilla, for that. I do appreciate it. And we haven't heard anything on a state level regarding any budget cuts or anything, correct?
We have not at this point.
And I think that, Commissioner, because we're an SDSI agency, I think you had sent something out at some point about the difference between.
Yes. So being an SDSI agency, we rely fully on the fees we collect to fund agency operations. So we do not get an appropriation from the legislature. Most agencies receive that appropriation, and those agencies are anticipating significant cuts, both in their current, likely both in their current fiscal year and then in the next biennium, just based on hard decisions that the legislature has. So that likely will not be our story if history continues to be true, meaning that they don't direct us on how we spend our money or what our bottom line is. However, the big question in front of us is, what has COVID-19 done to our revenue? What revenue is simply deferred because we're extending application and renewal timelines, and what is lost? And how are our license holders and or future license holders making different decisions than they would have otherwise before COVID? So that's a complicated question. We do not have an answer to that, but we will continue to watch that and make adjustments accordingly as we have information to do so.
Right. And do we have, and I'm just thinking out loud, do we have some sort of task force formed internally that is, I know that I'm pretty sure, obviously the commissioner in your team is looking at this, but do we have an actual plan in place for some type of task force to stay on top of this, and so that we can project if anything's going to happen, or we can kind of plan in advance?
Sure, I'll speak to that in two ways. First is, as we discussed previously, we are in the process. We are in a transition with our folks who handle our finances. Priscilla has been in that role for a long time as director of SSS, Staff and Support Services, and she is this month moving over to be part of the executive team to do more of strategic and organizational planning, as Renata Williams comes in as our director of finance. So a more specific to finance issues, her job will be more narrow in nature. So I highly anticipate her to have some ideas on this front. But so I don't have a task force identified in we're basically too small for that, but our finance team will do that work in partnership with me.
So we anticipate the new director coming in and kind of leading that charge to make sure we are being proactive as much as possible. Obviously, something like this has not happened before, but to be as proactive as possible, she will be the one kind of leading that.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, very good. And that was my only concern. I just want to make sure that, and I know you guys have done a great job at keeping things moving and taking care of our customers and our consumers. I just want to make sure that we are being as proactive as possible with this particular situation as it relates to finances. As far as, I know you mentioned a lot of staff working virtual, are we going to anticipate any additional IT costs on that? I mean, those types of things, I just want to make sure that we're watching that in advance as opposed to kind of getting hit on it on the back end.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, Stephanie, because, obviously any ability to mitigate any future fee increases could be greatly impacted by, what comes out of this, whether we have a large drop in revenue from license holders who, maybe on the fringe and just decide not to keep up with it. So thank you for that reminder.
Absolutely.
And not to oversimplify, but we deal with X being the number of appraisers and Y being the number of AMCs, and that's really it on a revenue stream. So we can stay relatively ahead of that through communication with those groups. So that's we're dealing with projections, and that's difficult, but at least we have grasp of the numbers that we deal with from a revenue side. And then on the defensive side, then we start to look and see about just expenses, and that's what we'll attack. Over the next 6 months, is just to look to see if we're being efficient. And as that comes together, we'll have a good idea as to when or if we're able to reduce or not charge an additional increase.
Yeah, and I think probably the budget committee should maybe have a regular update, at the committee level to talk about how many people are now not renewing that were before, so that we do get an idea of the trend and see it over time, so that we can plan for it.
That's a great idea. If we can be updated continuously on that, that would be good. I just don't want to get hit unexpectedly. I just want to make sure that someone's eye is watching. Someone is watching that very closely in terms of our income and our expenses. So if we can get updated on a regular basis, on our revenue and expenses, that'd be great. So we can catch it before it becomes an issue.
And just sort of an aside to that, we have roughly 5,000, 6,000 license holders. And so you can imagine, as difficult as it is to obtain an appraiser's license, I would anticipate that we won't have the type of dropout that maybe you would have on, maybe on Trek side from license holders or agents, that simply, that the fee doesn't make sense for them. But most appraisers, once they've gone through the process, I would think try and hang on to their license. But those that may be in retirement and have just kept kept up with it for many years, those might be the types that decide that they're not, gonna stay with it, or those that are like brokers and appraisers and really are doing more brokerage work. And so they, those people, if it's an extra expense, I would expect those to drop off. But so I can't imagine that we'll have a lot, but I think those people on the fringes, might make those decisions.
Hey, and Stephanie, this is Tony. Just to give you, over the last 60 days, probably, I would say the residential side had stayed very, very busy as the mortgage industry has been very active in these lower rate environments. The commercial side probably slowed down as the banks went away from traditional lending over the last 60 days and focused on the SBA loans. So all my appraiser friends are ready for those to get over with so they can go back to work. But I think that's more temporary than it is kind of a sign of the economy having done anything dramatic at this point.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
And Stephanie, another thing is appraisers, especially those that do bank work or mortgage work, are typically, we're busy on the up and we're busy on the down. It's the sort of in between time that, and so even if something dramatic happens with the economy, typically appraisers continue to be busy as banks try and work out problem assets and that sort of thing. So just so you understand that the way that's correlated.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions? Any questions for Priscilla for the budget? We're good. Very good. Thank you so much, Priscilla. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 22 is discussion and possible action to approve the strategic plan, the 2021 to 2025 strategic plan. And Tony sent us a copy of it with some proposed changes and asked the board to weigh in on that. So I will let you, Tony, go ahead and introduce that.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. This is Tony Slagle, Deputy Commissioner. I get the pleasure of talking about something somewhat dense at towards the end of the meeting, so bear with me. I did send you a copy of the draft strategic plan. I will say that 2 years ago when we were doing this, we were on the cusp of sunset, and it was a little less pleasant to do than it was this time. We were able to update it with some of the progress we've made, which is really nice. As the commissioner had mentioned earlier, this strategic planning process is really part of an appropriations process that we're not part of, being an SDSI agency. But it is something that needs to be approved, and the deadline for submission is June 1st, which is prior to the next commission and board meeting. And it is a joint document for both sign off of both the chair of the commission and the chair of the board. What staff really needs the board to weigh in on are is Schedule B, the performance definitions or performance measure definitions. That is the part of the document that staff will take direction from the policymakers in terms of what you as policymakers want us to continue to report and what you as policymakers want information from staff about. That's where the majority of the changes were, and we left it redlined in the document so that you could see exactly what the recommendations are. Some of these are from input from previous policy makers and previous boards and commissions, but some of them are also from staff recommendations as well. I'm happy to go through these. What I would like at the end of this conversation is some direction from you as board members as what you want us to include in this. The commission, just so you know, has delegated the final approval of this document to the executive committee of the commission, since there is not another commission meeting that will be happening for the June 1st deadline. So that's something that a delegation to approve any changes based on conversation we have here, as well as any conversation that's made from the executive committee on the commission side, needs to happen as well in terms of how the board wants to handle that delegation. That being said, I'm happy to answer any quick questions, or I can go over some of these and explain them in more detail. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at them. Again, I don't want to take your valuable time explaining something that you already know.
I have some questions, Tony.
Yes, ma'am.
So how often, again, is this document?
It's every odd numbered year, and I'm sorry, even numbered year. It's prior to the legislative session. So
Okay.
it was last updated in June of 2018.
Okay. And so when I look at these, it says performance measures, but a lot of them look to me like really just metrics.
Well, that is something that we need some guidance on, because there are two things that you can look at when you're reporting data. It's something that's informational, which is kind of a metric, or something that actually guides the performance of staff and gives you as policymakers some input on how well staff is doing their job. So you're absolutely right. Some of these recommended, and as you can see, there's questions in here that staff asked. Case in point, a number of new licenses issued. That's dependent on how many applications we get. So that is a metric on which we could report to give you some information, but that's not something that really it doesn't dictate the performance of staff in any real way. There are some, if you want to go that route and keep those metrics, the education division felt that there should be similar metrics on the education side. So those have been blue lined and added. If you want to remove them because they don't have any real impact on staff performance, then we would not include the recommended additions on the education side as well.
Okay, and so where do we report all of these findings?
We do. Staff Support Services provides there's a report that we do monthly and then quarterly, but there are also internal measures that staff looks at, as well as things that are put in on the monthly part of this, put on the monthly reports as well. They guide the information we report on the monthly reports. But there is a larger document that Staff Support Services has been in charge of that keeps track of this data on an ongoing basis. I don't, and Priscilla may be able to speak to this. I don't know if that's something that we actually report separately to any of the state leadership.
Yes, I'm happy to address this. No, we don't, and that is since we became an SDSI agency, this was no longer a requirement. As an SDSI agency, though, you may recall this very long report that we produced in November. That has a new set of performance metrics. In fact, that is what we are required to report on an annual basis. And then there's another one that we submit as an SDSI agency on a biannual basis. So really our goal over the last few years has been to figure out what are the important metrics. We have this set of metrics within the strategic plan as well. And because that's the format that the governor's office has prescribed, we respond to that. It ends up having data in a couple of different places. And from my perspective, from an audit perspective, we just have to be super careful that we're, even if we're publishing it, even though we're not reporting it anywhere else, we still are responsible for making sure it's accurate. Probably too much information.
Well, no, because I'm wondering, what do we do with this information? So some of it is in staff reports. I get that. We see that on a monthly basis. Yeah. But what happens with the other stuff, and where are we tracking whether we met those goals or not? Is there some kind of summation at the end of the year, like here was our goal and we did meet it or didn't?
Those are two different questions, really. One is reporting. The other one is using the information for management purposes. And Tony can speak to that better than I.
Well, we do keep track of this data for internal purposes. And as I was mentioning earlier, some of it is useful for information, but it's not useful in terms of dictating the performance of staff. So we keep track of it. And I'll admit, this predates me, but I think a lot of this was carryover from things that we needed to track as part of the appropriations process that are required to be reported to the LBB or whatever. And when we switched over to an SDSI agency, it's my understanding that to the extent possible, we tried to maintain things as evenly as possible as we did prior to getting the SDSI status. So a lot of that may not be appropriate anymore. And obviously that's up to all of you to decide whether or not you want to go that route.
Priscilla, did you have something to add?
I do have one comment, if I may. One of the part of the dialogue about what to keep tracking and what not to keep tracking was based on when Sunset came, so that if Sunset asked us for information that they were used to asking for other agencies, that we would have that. That is one thing to take into consideration when we look at performance measures.
Okay.
Well, I'm sorry,
Please.
Madam Chair. I will say that to the extent that that data that we're able to gather it, I don't know if it's something that we need to be keeping track of as a metric or a performance measure. I'll just to point out one thing so one of the things we have been tracking in the past is how many renewals we process in a 7-day period. Really a more proper, from staff's point of view, more proper metric and measure to look at is what's the average processing time, because that's something you can actually weigh in on. If the processing, if it's taking us 15 days when it should be taking us 10, that's something that the policymakers can look at and say, what do we need to do to help staff adjust to that? If it's how many you do within 7 days, that's just a number, and it doesn't give you any context as to whether or not. I mean, we could say it's 98%. Well, you don't know, as the other 2%, 40 days. I mean, it doesn't really give you the information that staff believes you need to kind of be able to keep staff performing the way you need them to.
Yeah, I think that if you're tracking it so that you can, I think it's important for us as policymakers to see trends in number of licenses, number of renewals, that sort of thing. I mean, I think that's just important information to have. Does it need to be included in this? I'm not sure that I really even understand what it's used for, and if it's just sort of an exercise, then, and it doesn't need to be in there, let's not do it. But and so that's sort of my question. If it's something the agency is tracking so that you can better utilize resources and dedicate resources, we used to have a ton of paper applications and now we don't, or what, that sort of thing. If the agency uses it to internally manage resources and you need it as part of this, it's not somewhere else, then keep it. If it's a performance measure that we actually look at and compare, and at the end of the year say, yes, we met the target or didn't, then it should be included. I think otherwise, if it's not useful, then let's not spend time gathering the data.
Well, on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, we provide you and the commission with a rolling 12 months, maybe 13 months, I can't remember, period of the number of license holders we have. That's not anything we're going to stop doing. But the question is that something we should be, as you said, including in this is something that we place the import on as being part of the strategic plan. I do agree with you. That information does help in terms of forecasting. If we see a decline in license holders or renewals, if we see a spike, that gives some indication that maybe there's some movement in the marketplace that we need to make sure that we can address and staff up to that, so we don't have customer service issues. But again, I don't know if it's something we're tracking, it's something we report. It's not necessarily something that needs to be part of the strategic plan.
Does anybody else have any other questions?
Yes, Madam Chair, this is Stephanie.
Yes, ma'am.
I do agree that it's important to track new license and certification, those types of things. Where I had question was regarding the purpose statement. And this may be kind of leaning towards what Madam Chair has brought up. If we're going to put it on the strategic plan, we need to be more detailed in our purpose of why we're gathering this information. So, Tony, as you mentioned, if it is to help us to forecast to see if there's a dip in the market or an increase in the market, then perhaps that level of detail should be stated in the purpose. Because just by reading the purpose, you don't know really why. I think it's important for us to have this data, first of all, just talking on line item 1. But we do need to put a little more detail, I believe, in the purpose of what we're going to use this information for. Once we get this information, what is the goal of the agency? What are we going to use this information for? If that makes sense.
It does to me.
So yeah, there are other areas on there regarding the desired performance. Tony, and I think you mentioned that you're seeking guidance from us to kind of let the staff know what we want those benchmarks to be, or those performance goals to be.
Yes, ma'am.
There was a question that I had, and I apologize. I'm doing all this electronically, trying to get to the particular section. Because for desired performance, I guess you're not on some of these. If it's for informational purposes, can you put informational purposes, or because higher than target is mentioned on a lot of these, but there's no target listed. So how do we know numerically what that means?
I think that's a valid point. Again, I think that's holdover language from previous strategic plans. I don't personally see any reason why we couldn't put for informational purposes on there, especially if it's a target, say, case in point with new licenses issued. I mean, if you have a certain target number, but we don't have any control over how many applicants come in, we may be shy of that every time. And is that really helpful for you as policymakers in determining things?
Right. So I just, those little things probably we need to tighten up on and just make sure it's clear. If there really isn't a desired performance of higher than target, then we shouldn't list that. We should put, like I said, maybe for informational purposes only. The other one I had was a section on here, and again, I apologize, I'm trying to scroll to this electronically. There was another section on here regarding the discipline issued at 35%. I'm trying to see if I can find it here. I apologize. Regarding the discipline, having a target of 35%, and that's something I was a little concerned about.
Is it that's 45%, the number of complaints resolved within 6 months?
Oh, I see it here. A percentage of complaints. Percentage of complaints. This is on the page number, of course, I'm not showing. Percentage of complaints resulting in disciplinary action. And I think there was a desired performance of higher than target of 35%. Can you explain that to me? Maybe I'm misunderstanding. I guess I interpret it as we're trying to issue disciplinary action at a minimum of 35% on each case that comes in. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you tell me where on the plan you're looking?
The section says the title is percent of complaints resolved resulting in disciplinary action.
So it's not in the proposed, it's in the existing. So it's not in any of the redlined or whatever. And yes, so it does say percent of complaints resolved resulting in disciplinary action.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah. And the section right after that, I think, has 45%.
Yeah. Well, one of them is resolved within 6 months, and the other one is resulting in disciplinary action. So
I'm referring to the disciplinary action one.
Right.
So on that one, can you explain that to me? Are we saying that we want to issue discipline in 45% of the cases that come in?
Yeah, I think I don't know if Troy's on the call, if he could is still on the call, if he could address that particular why higher than target 35%.
I am. This is Troy Bollier. And no, that's not what the intention. Like Tony mentioned earlier, a lot of this is holdover language from when we were not an SDSI agency, and we would actually be given a range based on historically what had occurred in the past. And so it was kind of a benchmark based on historically where they anticipated things to fall. It certainly was not anything aspirational. And, and if you look at our data in the staff reports, back around page 80 or so of your materials, you can see that our percentage is much lower than that. Out of all the complaints, only 25% actually result in discipline.
Thank you very much for that clarification.
And so, Tony, do you think that now that you've sort of heard from a couple of us about what we think is important or the difference between metrics and performance measures, that you could go back and make any staff recommendations, and then maybe we could delegate it to the executive committee to finalize before June 1st?
Yes, ma'am. And I think that's fine. I guess what my question is, I guess some clarity on whether or not you as a board want these informational metrics to stay in here, or if you want them to, if you want to delete them and go just with a basic of measures that impact or give you some indication of staff's performance. Either way is fine, but that's the sort of direction I need, is how you want to approach that.
Okay,
I have an addition to his question related. Many of these are for both the board and the commission. And so the decisions that the board makes, where it is a piece of data that affects both, we need to take, or I would suggest that you take into consideration that, because the commission has already delegated final approval authority to the executive committee without the same direction. Sorry to interrupt.
So remind me, I'm sure, Tony, you said at the beginning of this, what is it that we do with this document?
We send it to state leadership and the LBB. So I believe the governor's office gets a copy, the LBB gets a copy, the legislative budget board gets a copy. I'm not sure, and I apologize, I'm not sure if the lieutenant governor and the speaker, I think maybe they both get a copy as well. We upload it through an ABES system, so it's uploaded electronically, but it's submitted to them. And if we were not an SDSI agency, this document would be used to start the appropriations process. They would look at it to determine if there's anything in there that merits reducing, money that they're going to allocate, or increasing money that they're going to allocate to the agency. Since that's not part of the process, I don't really, to be honest with you, know what state leadership does with this document from an SDSI agency other than to have it for informational purposes.
So you don't get questions about it?
No, ma'am.
After it's been submitted. So then my suggestion would be to go back and have staff, now that they've heard from the board members about what's important, and make recommended changes that don't conflict with what TREC is doing, so that we don't create that issue, and to delete anything that doesn't need to be in there. I just don't want to spend staff resources on gathering information that no one is ever going to look at. If it has to be in this report in order for number of license holders for that information to get to us, then let's keep it in. But if that's not, if those two things are unrelated, then I don't see anything necessary about it. Does anybody else have any opinions?
Chair, this is Buster Renfro. Just a couple comments. I'm in agreement with everything you said. I think it's way too detailed, too cumbersome. I think we should be focused on those measures that are of validity to us, that show how we are performing overall. And it's just way too long. For instance, one of the things in here that I kept focusing on is number of emails answered. Well, I hope that's every one of them. I mean, that should just be every email that comes in deserves an answer. I don't even know why it's in here. It didn't make any sense to me.
Right. That was my question. Is it in there so that they say, well, now last year we got 1,000 and now we have 5,000, so we need to change. I mean, we need to put more resources towards people answering that. If that's necessary, then keep it in. If it's not.
Again, that is information that we track regardless of whether it's in this strategic plan or not.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking. And what's the target? Shouldn't the target be all of them? I mean, it just didn't seem like that category warranted to be in a plan like this. That's just common sense. We should be answering them all. So anyway, I think it needs to be streamlined considerably. And my recommendation would be get after it and make it or something that has value to us, and then the executive committee, look it over and finalize it.
Would you like to make that motion?
Most certainly. I would recommend that staff review the document and edit it and make it more appropriate based on our comments, and that then the document be processed, evaluated, and approved by our executive committee.
I'll second that.
We have a motion by Mr. Renfro and a second by Mr. Bolton. Does anybody have any questions or discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you, everybody.
We will make sure to have a committee meeting, obviously, in time for you to finalize that before June 1st.
Yeah, and I think in order for efficiencies, it might be best to have a joint one with both the commission and the board executive committees, just so that any sort of crossover can be worked out at that.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that takes us to agenda item number 23, discussion regarding the ASC compliance review. And I will let Commissioner Buckholz.
I'm sorry, I wasn't prepared to turn off my mute button. We have received a public comment request by Doug Olmixon. And so before many of the comments that he has mentioned, I would second. And so I'm going to read his and then I'll add a little myself. So this is the discussion regarding the ASC compliance review. So in February of 2020, these are Doug's words, former commissioner, the ASC made its biennial visit to evaluate the effectiveness of the board's regulatory programs in compliance with federal requirements and guidance. Over the past decade, the board has earned high ratings with only minor areas of concern, principally in timely handling of disciplinary complaints. In 2016, the ASC rated the board as excellent for the first time in its 25-year history, with absolutely no areas of concern. And now, in 2020, the board has once again been rated as excellent by the ASC. This level of performance consistency is an official recognition of and tribute to the very diligent work of the talented board staff under the strong leadership of the board members who continue to provide detailed policy oversight. You are all, staff and members, to be commended. Keep up the great work. That's from Commissioner Olmixon. So I completely agree. I was delighted to be a part of this review, to understand the process, and to host the appraisal subcommittee to Austin in February. Both the appraiser and the AMC programs received excellent marks, and this is due to the heavy lifting of many of our staff, both Denise Sample's licensing staff and, of course, Troy Boyer's enforcement staff. This was a very time-consuming process for them, and they did an excellent job. So I just want to congratulate them and say that it was a job well done. Thanks for your efforts. That's all I have for agenda item 23.
Thank you, and I'm sure that that the board all shares my sentiment, and that we appreciate the hard work of the staff over the last 2 years and before that, in making sure that we were prepared for this, and that Texas stands out as an exemplary state in handling all these issues that are related to appraisals, and that the ASC recognizes the hard work of the staff. So thank you to everybody for that. Agenda item number 24, discussion and possible action regarding possible topics for the November workshop. So we just want to hear from the board about any possible topics that you would like to discuss. As you know, we canceled the May workshop that was supposed to be for USPAP training, so that's probably going to stay on the running list. Past topics have included walking quorums, revisiting staff reports, the budget, enforcement procedures, the application process. Another topic that has come up as a possible on the list was instances that you would have to recuse yourself. There's been some confusion about that in the past, so we might talk about that. Does anybody else have any other topics? And if you don't right now, if you have some that come up as you do your committee work, certainly, we're always open to adding to that list.
I think something that came up, Madam Chair, excuse me, this is Stephanie.
Hearing none, we will continue.
Madam Chair?
Stephanie.
Madam Chair, can you hear me? This is Stephanie.
I'm sorry, I can.
Okay, I apologize. Something that did come up that we may want to consider is addressing jurisdiction as it relates to whether the appraisal side handles certain issues versus track.
That's a great suggestion. Anybody else? Chance, you're muted.
Yeah. Madam Chair, I did think of one that could be a possible, is that by November, we may very well have a understanding from the Attorney General as to their perceptions of our evaluation issue, and we may want to delve into that some.
Oh, boy.
Are you going to be sick that day, Jim?
Yes, I am.
Very good. That's a great suggestion. Thank you. Anybody else? Very good. Agenda item number 25, the discussion and possible action.
Please wait for the leader to admit you to the meeting. Thank you for.
You're earning your keep, Steve.
I
I think it looks like everyone's back.
Wow, that was quick.
So everybody fell off there? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I got back on really quick though.
Yeah.
It was really quick.
suggest you, Chance.
Steve was on it. Okay, we have everybody back. Sorry about that. So discussion and possible action regarding agenda items for future meetings. One thing there's Stephanie. All right, I want to make sure everybody's here again before we. We have Lisa.
I don't see, is Kat on? Oh, yes, I see her. Okay.
I'm here.
Very good. So one item for future meetings is that Ms. Reed Lynch and I had a phone call with the Counsel for the Regulatory Compliance Division in the Office of the Governor. And this is a new division that was set up in the last legislative session to monitor rules for out of agencies that might be might limit market competition. Thank you. And so we started to learn about that process a little bit, and it will affect our rulemaking probably at some point. And so we'll just get the whole big picture together for everybody and explain that in more detail at the next board meeting. So that will be on the future agenda. Another thing is that Mr. Jeffries has submitted his resignation to the governor, and it is effective September 30th. So at the August board meeting, it will be his last board meeting after serving on the board for 6 years. So we will certainly recognize that special occasion at the August board meeting. And are there any other items that anyone can think of that should be on the next board agenda? Hearing none.
Can I make a motion we all attend in person?
I'll second that.
I think we will wait for direction from the governor about that. Or maybe we do it outside. No, it's August. We can't do it outside in August.
So currently we are able to conduct an open meeting using this platform because of the Office of the Governor's waiver of certain open meetings laws. So it all depends on what's happening with COVID-19 and how long those waivers continue to know how we'll meet next. But
we can call it football practice.
Will there be football?
What's football?
There better be.
Okay, so agenda item number 26, discussion and possible action to schedule future meeting and workshop dates. At the February meeting, we had set a tentative date for the August meeting of August 21st. And so does anybody at this point have any conflicts with that date?
This is Lisa Sprinkle. I do.
Yes, ma'am.
We have an event planned, and hope, depending upon the situation health-wise, we will be able to attend that.
Okay.
That requires us leaving the state and so on.
Okay. If we can look at other possible dates in August, I think if it would be agreeable to everyone that I have kids in school, and so depending on when that start date is, I'll need to look at that, and probably Stephanie and Chance as well. So if we could, we'll leave it at August 21st, but we will work on changing that date so that Ms. Sprinkle can attend. Does that work for everyone?
That's fine. I can do any time, you know. Actually, I'll be there regardless, but they actually moved the Indy 500 to the 23rd of August, tentatively, but you know what? I think I'd rather be in Austin for the board meeting. So, but if y'all want to move it to the 14th or the 28th, whatever, anything works for me. It's fine. I'll be there.
Okay.
Thank you, Clayton.
Wow, Clayton, what a difference a couple of years makes. Last time we were moving the meeting so that you could go to the Indy 500, and now we're keeping it so you can avoid the Indy 500.
Because it's always on Memorial Day, so we never had it did.
When is Memorial Day? The 25th.
25th, yes.
It's a Tuesday? It's a Tuesday?
Monday.
Next weekend.
Oh.
Okay, so we will let everybody know as soon as possible about that August 21st date, whether we can move it to either the 14th or the 28th. And we typically set a tentative date for the November board meeting, correct? Okay, so in November, the 27th is Thanksgiving, and so the date before that would be the 20th or the 13th. So does anybody have any thoughts on either one of those dates? Does the 13th further from Thanksgiving typically work best for everyone?
Fine with me.
Fine with me.
Okay.
Works for me.
Very good. We will set the tentative date then for the November meeting for November 13th, Friday. Very good. So if there's anything else that hasn't been covered, now would be the time. Very good. So then this meeting, the time is 2:21, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all so much
Thank
for
you,
bearing
Sarah.
with all the technical
Thank you very
issues.
much, Sarah. Thank you.